A 9-member bench of India's top court announced the ruling in a major setback for the BJP-led government today, which argued that privacy was not a fundamental right protected by India's constitution. The court said privacy is an intrinsic part of the right to life and liberty. A senior lawyer in the case said this is a blow to the government since it had said that people don't have that right to privacy. The judgment also has a bearing on broader civil rights as well, including the law that criminalizes homosexuality. The lawyers say it also impacts on the beef ban and alcohol ban imposed in some states in India. Today's ruling is the second landmark decision from the Supreme Court this week alone. Just 2 days back, the apex court said it is unconstitutional for Muslim men to divorce their wives by saying talaq 3 times. Earlier on in the day, WION's Jessica Taneja spoke to a number of lawyers on this story. Let's listen in.
It's a great judgment. It's the right judgment. To my mind, it was clear that the right to privacy is part of Article 21. Once the Supreme Court has held in so many judgments that the right to life includes the right to live with dignity, and the right to live with dignity will include the right to live with privacy also. However, every fundamental right, even Article 21 rights, are subject to reasonable restrictions imposed by law.
The Honorable Supreme Court has unequivocally, in a 9-judge bench verdict, although there are separate judgments, I think the judgment is unanimous that privacy is a fundamental right. It inheres in Article 21 and in other parts of Part 3, that is in the chapter on fundamental rights, and that the previous 2 decisions of 8 judges and 6 judges which indicated that privacy may not be a fundamental right has been overruled. So it's, I think, a great victory for the citizens of this country and a watershed moment in constitutional law in this country.
Team coverage continues as well with WION's Raghavendra Rao, who's also in the courtroom today. Let's get reaction.
The right to privacy is a fundamental right. This landmark judgment delivered by India's Supreme Court today is likely to throw open the floodgates for a variety of concerns over matters related to individual privacy. The first in line would be the Aadhaar case already being heard by a 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court. Whether the Supreme Court declares Aadhaar or the Unique Identification Program of Indian government as a valid program remains to be seen. Today's judgment is also being viewed as a setback for the central government, and it will be interesting to see how the centre defends its stance when matters like Aadhaar and homosexuality are argued before courts in days and weeks to come. In New Delhi with video journalist B.D. Dhyani, Raghavendra Rao, WION.
All right, so let's break all of this down to find out what exactly the right to privacy is and what today's verdict exactly means for you, as well as some of the legal implications. Taneja is here to break it all down.
Well, thank you so much, Archit. And first of all, congratulations. I mean, it's a historic day. The landmark judgment is out, and right to privacy is now a fundamental right. You know, for a long time, this debate was going on. There was a house that was saying that right to privacy is an elitist concern. And there was another house that believed in the fact that right to privacy, the matter of privacy should be a matter of choice. But finally, a lot of debate went on in the last few weeks. And now the Supreme Court is out with its landmark judgment, which says that right to privacy is a fundamental right. But before we get into like how it's going to help people, what kind of implications it's going to have, let's first understand what is right to privacy. It's a fundamental right, but we should understand that quite like other rights, right to privacy is also not an absolute right. So just take a look at what is right to privacy and what does it say? Let's break it down. What is right to privacy? Right to privacy is a fundamental right, an intrinsic part of right to life and personal liberty. And right to privacy is not an absolute right. As I just mentioned, it's a fundamental right, and quite like other rights, it's not an absolute right. It's also subject to reasonable restrictions, which means that there are certain limitations, and those limitations will be assessed from one case to other. So yeah, right to privacy is not an absolute right. Right to privacy is going to ensure that user data is kept protected, but at the same time, it's not an absolute right. Moving on to the implications, your privacy is protected now. What does verdict mean? So let's take a look at what kind of data is actually protected. Intimate details regarding marriage. It's now protected. It's up to you what kind of data you want to share with the government and other players out there. Intimate details regarding sexuality. So it's going to actually bring another debate, that is Section 377, which criminalizes homosexuality. Personal details over relation with family. So it's up to you now what kind of data, be it your private data, personal data, details about your family. It's up to you how you want to share and what kind of data you want to share with the government. Parting of personal data by credit card is also now protected after this right to privacy has been ensured under fundamental rights. Personal data on social media. Earlier, if you would post anything on social media, it would lead to arrests as well. But now, what we are posting on social media is it comes under right to privacy. Private details and IT declarations. So all of these data is now protected, and we need to understand that right to privacy ensures that user data is kept protected. Now it's up to users. It gives users more power in terms of what kind of data they can share with the government. But at the same time, it's going to bring about a lot of other debates in the weeks to come. Over to you, Archit.
All right, Ankit Taneja getting us the very latest on that. So exactly the Supreme Court's verdict and the impact on the right to privacy. How is this going to impact the world's largest biometric program, the Aadhaar card, as well as DNA profiling, the bill which allows the government to access your DNA profile without your consent? Let's take a look.
The Apex Court ruling on privacy could have far-reaching implications on various services, laws and acts that make data sharing mandatory. Let's look at its impact on two major government schemes, the Aadhaar program and the DNA Profiling Bill 2017. Let's begin with the world's largest biometric ID card program, Aadhaar. While a separate bench of the Supreme Court will decide on the validity of the Aadhaar scheme, the ruling on privacy has definitely weakened the government's case. The centre will now have to prove its scheme as reasonable and proportionate. It will have to establish two important points: why it's important to collect citizens' biometric details and how the government aims to protect the data of citizens. As for the DNA profiling bill that is still in the works, it incorporates a clause that someone's DNA can be profiled without his or her consent. That would require to be changed given the Supreme Court verdict on privacy. It could even be that the bill is entirely shelved. Bureau Report, WION.
All right, certainly a lot to digest when we break it down when it comes to personal data, what we share online, plus, of course, the Aadhaar card and DNA profiling. But one element of this certainly casts light when it comes to the right to declare your sexual orientation. From the courtroom to the newsroom, we have Jessica Taneja standing by to bring us perspective on that. Jessica, give us the mood like, what it was like there, as well as specifically about the decriminalization of homosexuality.
Archit, when this came up during the course of hearing this particular matter on right to privacy, one could not have preempted that Justice Chandrachud would actually say that sexual orientation and your rights within the confines of your room are actually protected by your right to privacy. So if it's declared as a fundamental right, one can absolutely agree with the fact that now Section 377 will also find a mention. So that will be challenged again. Remember, this is not an issue which only limits to a minority. He categorically said that it's not about a minority issue. Even if the majority doesn't agree with it, or if it does not affect a majority, it doesn't mean that the minority does not have a right when it comes to privacy. So I think it is a landmark judgment. It opens discourse for for a lot of other things.
Jessica, let me also ask you about this. In the second time this week alone, a landmark ruling by the Supreme Court. I mean, this was really a clash between the government and the top court, and of course a big blow for the BJP government. Was there perhaps a sort of a surprise? I mean, what was the reaction like when this ruling came down earlier on today?
Ajit, I don't think it was a surprise. The ruling government, in fact, government must have been caught in a position where they expected that right to privacy would not become a fundamental right. I remember Attorney General K.K. Venugopal arguing for the centre, and its stand was that right to privacy remains a common law when the right to food, to shelter are not given the kind of importance that right to privacy needs to be given. So I think it's a shock for them, but I think they've come to terms to accept that right to privacy is important, and I feel that this will have a huge bearing on Aadhaar as well as Section 66A when it comes to Section 377. Interestingly, now the government will have to ensure that Aadhaar scheme is reasonable and proportionate. It will have to establish that it is an essential when collecting details like biometrics and other personal details. They will have to ensure that they are protected. So now follows the data protection law, which the country has never had. Before privacy, this country actually needs a data protection law, given the kind of situations we've seen in the past recently, even challenging the Aadhaar. So many information on various, channels has been leaked, be it online, students' details, people's personal details, be it bank details, have been leaked online. So where does this stop? It stops with a data protection law, a privacy commission in the country. Let's see if that comes in shape.
A big wait and watch game when it comes to, of course, we'll continue this conversation. Now, while we are yet to see what is next in the Aadhaar chapter, let's also move on to another important topic when it comes to the right to privacy. Of course, the aspect of data sharing. Of course, that is the DNA profiling bill of 2017. So let's understand the fate of this bill in the backdrop of this whole scheme of the right to privacy as a fundamental right. Here's what that bill entails.
Quite like many other countries, India too is keen on having laws to regulate and standardize DNA tests in the country. While a DNA fingerprinting bill is in the works for quite some years now, a final draft of the bill has been released by the Law Commission of India, and it is called the DNA-Based Technology, Use and Regulation Bill 2017. But before we deep dive into what the bill proposes, let's understand why we need laws to govern DNA tests. As experts have emphasized over the years, we need such laws to standardize DNA testing, to make DNA data admissible as evidence in judicial proceedings, to regulate the use of such information by law enforcement agencies, and to set procedures and protocols. There are a plethora of reasons to have a regulatory framework for DNA testing, and also it's important to understand that no database can be prepared in the absence of a legal framework. And therefore, this bill seeks to set up two institutions, DNA Profiling Board and DNA Data Bank, to establish regulatory institutions and standards for DNA testing, supervising activities of laboratories that carry out DNA tests, and to have DNA database of convicts or suspects. While the new bill looks promising, it brings along a lot of objections and concerns related to consent and privacy. We, however, are yet to see the fate of this bill in India. Bureau Report, WION.
All right, let's bring in Ankit Taneja to get a perspective on this story when it comes to DNA profiling. Ankit, I mean, certainly the pros and the cons, specifically when it comes to the DNA footprint. Where do we stand when it comes to right to privacy? A good thing or perhaps a step backwards?
So, Archit, we need to understand a bit of context here. It's not just India that's going to have DNA databases. Many countries already have DNA databases because, for example, in case of a criminal investigation, DNA database or DNA records, they actually come to use for authorities. So, India is also going to set up its DNA database. But at the same time, we need to understand a couple of things here. A, the DNA bill that is being proposed by the government, that's in the works still now.
Right.
So, there are certain concerns about it. So it doesn't clear, like, do you need a consent of someone to get the DNA records? Who all will be accessing the data? And when will you remove the data? In what conditions and circumstances can you approach a person for the DNA records? So all of these are still unanswered. And also, given that there's an increase in data breaches, the identity theft cases are going up. And India still has weak data protection laws. So in such cases where a bill is being proposed which has certain concerns which are not answered yet, and in such times when the Supreme Court comes up with a landmark judgment that says that right to privacy is a fundamental right now, so in some ways it ensures people that they have more control in terms of their data that they can share with the government.
And what they actually want to give out as opposed to what they're told to give out.
Right.
All right, let's bring in also our correspondent joining us from Bengaluru. We have Nishchita Virendra joining us. Nishchita, great to have you on the program. My question to you is, in terms of this verdict that came in, what is the people's sentiment? What are people talking about this? Are they excited about this? Are they perhaps mixed feelings? I mean, the second landmark ruling this week after the triple talaq verdict that came in on Tuesday, what are people on the ground saying?
Well, the right to privacy verdict has truly opened questions on past cases, on numerous issues that could be retouched upon once again. But as far as Bengaluru, the tech hub, is concerned, it is the data privacy issue that is a big hit here, considering the fact that all these days several activists, several experts from the city had been closely following the arguments that were being put forth before the Supreme Court's 9-member bench, and they feel that this is certainly a landmark judgment. This is the first time that the court has taken a stand. Of course, in a very strong stand, saying that this is a fundamental right, privacy is a fundamental right. What a few of these experts that I interacted with went on to state, if you can draw parallels with the time of emergency in India, when there was requirement of wiretapping, it was done for a few specific individuals. There was no easy access for data of any individual, any person on the street. But now the situation was a lot better. The data was in the hands of the government, and the government was giving out the data through their licenses to private parties. So that will be largely curtailed, and that seems to be a huge hit, at least in the tech hub of Bengaluru. That seems to be the absolute highlight.
All right, of course, certainly a big question when it comes to data breach cases. As we see more and more cases of identity theft surfacing every now and then, it is important to make sure that everyone's personal details are kept protected. Now, while in India, this is a historic judgment, and it has proved that the protection of citizens' personal data is its key concern. But let's also take a look at how the other part of the world, other countries deal when it comes to right to privacy. First up, the United States of America. Privacy is protected under the 4th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. In Australia, there is also a Privacy Act. It was enacted back in 1988. In the EU, there is a data protection directive that was enacted in 1995 to safeguard the personal data of its users. In Brazil, privacy is considered to be an inviolable right. In Canada, privacy is also protected through legislation. Let me bring in Jessica Taneja, joining in so many aspects of the story, Jessica, when it comes to, data protection, this DNA angle. Certainly if you look at the DNA angle, there's two sides to that coin, where it comes to certainly, criminals and having that DNA record there to convict offenders. But at the same time, your average citizen perhaps is concerned about giving things out to the government because they perhaps feel this is not right, this is not my place, because who knows how that data could be misused. Your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, Archit. I think you made a very valid point. Before we could go into the right to privacy debate, there was a debate on Aadhaar, and I remember senior lawyer Shyam Devan arguing for the petitioner, saying, is the government trying to tie us with an electronic lead, trying to monitor wherever we go, whatever we do, if wherever we are, in fact, even in our washrooms, in our house, inside our dining rooms, our living rooms, is the government going to monitor us everywhere we go? So this certainly does make sense. One needs their right to privacy, and if you see the basic arguments and the basic judgment that has come out today says I deserve privacy in the confines of my home. If I allow you to enter inside my home, that is out of my consent. If you forcibly enter, that is invasion, clearly, and that gives me the right to privacy to keep you out of my house. So I think, on a lighter note, it allows you to let people enter who you might want to for a birthday party. Otherwise, let them out.
All right, let me bring in Ankit Taneja as well. Ankit, what can perhaps India learn, if possible, or the vice versa? Is there something that the world could learn from India when it comes to right to privacy? We saw about, the United States, Canada, Australia, the EU, when it comes to really protecting the rights of its citizens. We've seen throughout many parts of the world recently so many data hacks, identity theft cases where people's confidential data is unfortunately hacked, and then it's out there for whatever reasons. Is there something that India is now doing, or perhaps it could learn better, or vice versa? Could something other countries learn from India? Your thoughts?
Yeah, Archit, as you just pointed out, that in today's times when identity theft cases and data breaches are happening every now and then, it becomes really important to take such steps that ensure the protection of user data. And as we just saw, this is one step that Supreme Court has come out with today. But we need to understand this is not the only thing that we can do. We need to have better laws in terms of data protection. Right. For example, if you talk about UK, recently they introduced the new data protection bill, and it gives users more control over their data. For example, one of the things is they can ask social media companies like Facebook and Twitter that remove our data. They can approach the companies and ask them to remove their data entirely from their servers. And not only this, for example, when you sign up for any service or any application, there are certain checkboxes that are ticked by default, and you have to accept them if you want to sign up for that service. Otherwise, you are not eligible for that service.
Right, and who knows where that information is going or if it's even really protected.
Exactly. But the point is that the bill, the UK Data Protection Bill that was recently introduced, it ensured that those checkboxes will not be there by default. And in terms of penalties, the bill clearly state that if any company tries to breach the clauses of the bill, they're going to pay a heavy amount. So these are some of the highlights of the bill. I think in India also, given that we have a very old IT Act, we have a very weak data protection laws and acts.
Right.
So we need to have stringent measures to
stricter laws perhaps to protect the citizens' data. Certainly something that India could learn from after this landmark ruling on the right to privacy. And of course the verdict sent some reaction on social media. As soon as it came out, social media was in fact buzzing with reaction. Most people on Twitter and Facebook hailing it as a landmark verdict, a victory. But of course there were others who took a lighter view of the Supreme Court verdict. A look at what social media had to say on the right to privacy.
A cheeky view on the Supreme Court verdict on privacy was this cartoon showing a man stark naked, bereft of all privacy, being offered a pair of pants by the Supreme Court. The Twitterati exploded over the unanimous 9-judge verdict. Hashtag right to privacy was one of the leading trends worldwide for several hours today. Read with the triple talaq verdict only the other day, the people were all praised for the judiciary. But some also questioned the validity of privacy in the age of social media, where people log on to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc. to post perhaps even the smallest and the most trivial details of their daily lives. But some would say that the real battle is still ahead. India and Indians are still to figure out what personal privacy means in our context. Bureau Report, WION.
All right, let me go back to Jessica Taneja standing by in the newsroom. Jessica, it was a long day for you. You were in the courtroom. I mean, this was the second landmark ruling this week alone. Perhaps is the court going to surprise us? Any more interesting rulings coming? Or to put it, into a lighter note, where do we move forward from this verdict when it comes to the right to privacy? Sum it up for us.
Well, Archit, it opens a new discourse for, the right to freedom, the right to liberty, what defines privacy at this point in time. Remember, there are restrictions, there are limitations. This was one of the concerns. But then again, in a technological era, what does privacy mean leaves us all in a very sort of an absurd sort of discussion moot. What happens when we post our content on social media? So for that, you need data protection laws as well. This country needs a data, protection division where things can be monitored from time to time. Just giving the citizens right to privacy, I feel, is just not enough. From here on, of course, Aadhaar will be another strong and long legal battle. So one will have to wait for that. But at the same time, it's sort of re-invited old debates. Now, what happens in those debates is yet to see. But then again, I think it's time to celebrate a little, even though we don't know what the restrictions are at this point in time. But I think we all have right to privacy and to do, in fact, whatever we want.
Absolutely. Jessica Taneja, thank you so much for all of those inputs, as well as all of our correspondents, Ankit Tuteja, Nishchita Barandra, as well as Raghavendra Rao. We appreciate those insights. A right to privacy, a step in the right direction, but perhaps still a long way to go. That does it for tonight's discussion. I'm Archit Seshadri. Thanks so much for joining us on WION. World is One News. Have a good night.